Worship liturgy is always in a state of flux.
Balancing tradition and modernity is a challenge for all religious communities.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Well, thank you, Mark, and I too would like to welcome you to today's American Religious Town Hall meeting session. We're so very glad you've joined us. Before we get started with our discussion, I'd like for our panelists to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what they do. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, and I'm canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I'm the senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hi, I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the senior pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
I'm Andrea Luxton. I'm president of Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, which is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the senior minister of First Christian Church in downtown Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
And my name is Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I'm an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
Well, I thank everyone for being here today. Looking forward to this discussion. Let's get right to our subject, shall we? Apparently for some, the new way of doing church is the old way of doing church. Both religion blogger Gene Veith and journalist Anna Keating have recently reported that worship in some megachurches is changing. Megachurches are very large membership churches which sprang up over the last 40 years or so, at least in part around a stripped-down worship style heavy on electronic music and lighting techniques modeled after rock concerts than anything out of church history. The idea has always been to make worship more attractive to people. Critics have usually added, and so thin as to be superficial. But some of the biggest and most well-known of these evangelical bastions have begun to offer more traditional liturgies in one or more of their many weekly services. The recital of some of the church's ancient creeds, the Lord's Supper every Sunday, incense, bells, and even attention to the seasons of the traditional church's calendar, especially Advent and Lent, are actually becoming part of the life of some of these churches. One reason cited is that because of so many congregations having to deal with the after effects of sexual or financial scandals, leaders are seeking to offer more depth and finding it in formulas that have been around for hundreds of years. Another reason for the changes Veith and Keating both write is that evangelicalism itself may be waning in popularity. Yet another may simply be a market-driven response. They're finding that people want more tradition, so they offer it. Some of the questions I'd like our panelists to consider today are these. Is this a trend that's going anywhere or nowhere at all? The second question, are the traditional things which we've been told are obstacles to growth really more important than some have thought? And then finally, what might this have to say about other principles of the church growth movement, like the need for homogeneity? Now, we're going to ask our panelists to consider these questions, but there are some others. Before we go to our discussion, I'd like for those who helped to begin the program to come back and make some other remarks. We go back to John Peterson. Thank you, Canon Peterson, for being here today. Tell us a little more of your thoughts on this subject, please.
Well, number one, I think that I would want to encourage the listening audience, if you're interested in this subject, to look at the references that the moderator has made, particularly to Anna Keating's work in an article that she wrote on evangelical mega churches in the Jesuit publication America. It's really a great read, and I would certainly encourage you to do that. Much of Keating's article actually focuses on the megachurch New Life, which is a non-denominational charismatic evangelical church in Colorado Springs. And it is a church that has some 10,000 members that is now embracing more traditional liturgies, as well as a very great program in social justice work. In that church, you will hear an Anglican doxology. You will hear old Catholic practices like doxologies are found in Eucharistic prayers and Catholic devotion of the Rosary. You will see, as the moderator pointed out, liturgical stoles reflecting the color of the church season. And those are, of course, worn by the clergy. And even some ancient ritual gestures like kneeling or making the sign of the cross in front of the Eucharist, the Holy Communion. So you would certainly see here a tremendous difference than what you would normally see in a mega church. Also, at the Epiphany Church in Dallas, Fort Worth, they actually, in that church, use incense and candles every week. They use the revised lectionary for all the readings that will be preached upon, and ancient prayers from memory. And you will hear, after the scriptures are read, the very traditional phrase, "The word of the Lord, thanks be to God." So very traditional Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran forms of liturgy taking place. I was so fascinated with this, actually, and the reason I was willing to take the lead today is because this is happening within the mega churches. But the reverse, and what the impact of the mega churches is having on traditional mainline churches as well. And I like to use the National Cathedral as an example, because here at the National Cathedral on a Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, you will go and you will be able to attend a rock service there. And in that rock service is included jazz, but also pop, blues, African American, as well as praise music that comes out of the gospel tradition. Certainly not a normal pattern for an Episcopal church, but this is being incorporated into the Anglican liturgy now as a result. And the the presenter of the National Cathedral, the person who's in charge of the liturgy, Jesus, what is happening here is that the traditional forms are now being wrapped differently. And I love that phrase, being wrapped differently. I'll have more to say about that later on, but now it's the rabbi's turn.
Thank you, Ken Peterson. Rabbi Levin, there are no challenges in Judaism like this, are there?
No, of course not. We have no challenges in Judaism. I think actually all religious traditions have to figure out how they balance their traditional practice with the modern world in which we live. And in Judaism, which is, I think, a little different than some of my Christian colleagues' experience, the liturgies are, in many ways, ancient formulations that go back thousands of years. And there is a sense in Jewish tradition that if you don't say the words at the right time in the right way, then you didn't fulfill your obligation actually to perform the ritual that you were supposed to perform. At the same time, if it doesn't mean anything to the worshiper and you're just checking a box, then what's the point? And modern worshipers in Jewish tradition, and I suspect in other religious traditions, are asking that same question. Why should I do this if it doesn't mean anything to me? And figuring out how you balance that, I think, is a really significant challenge that clergy and congregations debate. The interesting thing is in Jewish tradition, the person who leads the worship is not always a clergy person. It's someone who is titled Shaliach Tzibur, which literally means a messenger of the community. So if the worship that's being led doesn't speak to the people in that community, then that person is off and not really a part of the community he or she is trying to lead. At the same time, there's so much pull towards tradition that without substance, there is a sense that I didn't really do it or it wasn't done right. And I love when people come to me in my congregation and they say, Rabbi, why don't you do the traditional melody? And what they mean by the traditional melody is, well, that's the melody I grew up with.
Yeah, right.
So the right way of saying a particular prayer is actually a melody that may only be 100 years old. And if you talk to kids that are growing up today, they look at certain traditional things as being completely foreign to their experience because they grew up only in modern contexts. So I think that rhythm, that vibration between the pull of tradition and the pull of sort of our modern musical tastes and ways of relating to God and to each other, that vibration between those two poles is sort of where the music of religious life is found.
So this seems to be a universal challenge. It's not just specific to Christianity or Judaism, and we can talk about how it is in your churches as well. And Reverend Plumley, how is it with the disciples? Do you have these same concerns and challenges?
Well, we only have about, I think I can count 5 mega churches in the whole United States. Most of our congregations are pretty small, and they do vary from place to place, what kind of worship service you'll find, what kind of theology you'll find, simply because we're kind of the logical extension of the free church, logical extreme of the free church. But what I wanted to talk about is the effect that this worship change has on televised worship. Because so many of these really, really large churches televise their worship someplace. If they're not on one of the big networks, they're on some small local thing. And silence doesn't play well on TV, you know. That's one of the reasons that their service is boiled down to music all the time. And where there wasn't music, somebody speaking. To try to televise the Lord's Supper, once you've done the words of institution and begin distributing the Lord's Supper by whatever means you do in your particular tradition, there's not a whole lot of action for the camera to catch. So I'm wondering how those television-heavy or television-driven ministries are doing this. Frankly, as I turn over and check on them every once in a while, see if they're still doing what I condemn them for doing.
Reassure yourself.
Yeah, reassure myself that they're still as silly as they always were. I have not seen these kinds of changes that these articles talk about. That's one of the reasons that I find this subject such an interesting one, because I want to see how it plays on TV. I think creative people can make that work, and I would like to see it, but I just haven't seen it yet.
Let's hear what Dr. Robeck has to say about this.
I'll give you a bit of a historical perspective, and that is to say, I think that when the Protestant Reformation took place 500 years ago, many Protestants threw the baby out with the bathwater. They were rejecting the institutional church at that particular time for all the foibles that it had and so forth. And they had discovered the centrality of the Word in particular. And so as a result, they threw out an enormous amount of liturgical patterns and the sacraments that had controlled so many aspects of a person's life from birth to death and everything in between. Some Catholic churches, Orthodox churches had the normal would be 7 sacraments that punctuated life, but some of them had at particular times as many as 20. So what happened at the Protestant Reformation is to say, away with all this stuff. We want Jesus and we want the Word. And so they pushed for personal conversion, and they pushed for spending time with the Word. So we get longer sermons in this process. I really welcome, in a sense, the return to some of these patterns from prior to the Reformation. I think that we lost a great deal when we essentially broke with the tradition, the historical tradition of the church. There were a lot of evangelicals in particular that gave up the creed it's not that they don't believe the creed, it's just that they feel like unless this creed has real meaning for you, why in the world are we confessing it every week? That's, certainly in my church, we confess the creed once a year, whether we want to or not. During the week of prayer for Christian unity, I usually lead in the creed. But the fact of the matter is, I think what we are rediscovering is immanence, not just immanence, but the transcendence of God, the mystery, the awe. I even used incense in a sermon, or at the beginning of a sermon in my church. I was preaching from Isaiah 6 in his call, and he's in the temple, and all of a sudden he recognizes, here's God, and he's speaking, and I need to respond. And it changed the minds of many people in my church about the role that incense could play, because it gave them a picture of the interchange between God and Isaiah that they had never seen before, simply because of the incense. So I look at these kinds of things and say, I think this is a good thing. How widespread it is in megachurches, I can't say, because I've never been in a megachurch where they went to that kind of extreme. I don't know where it may be 2 or 3 churches that this Keating woman wrote about, but I don't think it's a widespread phenomenon.
All right, thank you, Dr. Matthews. How is it?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Very interesting topic. I too read some articles from Ms. Keating, and just fascinating research there. She even cites a church in the Dallas area, the Village Church, as a mega church with 14,000 members, and a Southern Baptist church. And she cited how this church has gone back to using a liturgical calendar, it's credo in nature. They fast during Lent. They observe Epiphany, of course, Easter and Pentecost. And I think that's really important. Also, the mega church in the Chicago area, Willow Creek, I think they have 24,000. That was the model way back then, when they would use a lot of different, they were known as a seeker-sensitive church. And they would use an awful lot of drama and lights and just a whole lot of different things to attract people who were unchurched. And now this church, according to this article, are going back to their roots. I think one thing that happens in a lot of these churches is when you're younger, you are open to trying different churches with different styles, so long as the substance is there. But I think as people grow a little older, they kind of want to go back to their roots. And I see that happening in our church. We have some of our older members who say, well, you know what, I kind of like to have a little bit more peace, and where the service is more peaceful, and instead of a lot of praise and worship and I won't say loud, but we get a little loud, but they kind of like it, just peace and tranquility. So I think that happens across the age demographics as well.
All right, thank you very much. And then Dr. Luxton, your position, your take on this.
Yeah, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I think we have a mix. We're never very heavy on liturgy, but there are more traditional styles and certainly more modern styles. A few years ago, I was in Cameroon, and I went to an environment and there were 2 services. I was asked to speak at the first service. It was kind of a community service. Then there was another one that was afterwards, which was university service. Well, the community service was full of movement and energy. The choir, danced down the aisles, lots of local instruments, a lot of energy, a lot of movement. That was their worship. The second one, for some reason, they had decided that for the university students, they needed to be more traditional. So there was no movement. The choir stood still. They played regular hymns. They played regular, kind of Western instruments. And it was flatter, is the best way to explain it. And it struck me that sometimes a worship style had been imposed because it was assumed the worship style was right. So as I look at this question, my question is, why are we worshiping? And I think if we lose track of that, if it just becomes to attract more people, or if it becomes because this liturgy is the right thing, then I think we're going to head in the wrong direction. Worship has got to be more than an end in itself. It is an end in order to, it's done in order to bring people closer to God, maybe closer to the community, and And so I think that has to come into this conversation as we look at the balance between the two.
Well, interestingly enough, time has run out for this segment. I wish we had more time to dig more deeply into this, but there are some summations coming up in just a few moments, so you'll be able to throw in some last-minute thoughts there in just a few seconds. But before that, I'm asking you if you would please stand by for this important announcement. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome back. And I would also encourage you to go to the website. You'll find some very interesting things there. You'll see past programs that are archived for you that go back many years. You'll also learn about the Town Hall Estates, wonderful organization providing care for many clients. And we're going to go to our summations just now, but if you care to send me a letter to describe for me what kind of subjects or topics you'd like to see and hear discussed on this program, I'll be happy to receive those from you. Thank you. Let's go to our summations. We'll begin with Ken Peterson. You're first.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the last words I said in the introduction. The service is wrapped differently. And wrapped differently means it takes the ancient traditions of the church and wrapping them in familiar and by introducing something new. And I think that that's really an important element. And certainly Mel was talking about that with what's happening within some of the evangelical churches and charismatic churches that he was speaking about. And the other thing is that the worship should never be a performance. It must always be worship, which includes all the participation on the part of the congregation. And that should be a very essential part, that it's not a performance for television, but instead a worship experience.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Matthews.
Yeah, I'm open to different ideas and methods in worshiping and attracting people, so long as we understand what you attract people with will be the very thing you have to keep them with. So we have to make sure that we attract them with the gospel and make sure that our worship services are full of substance. And may the Lord bless you guys as you navigate through churches growing and churches declining.
Thank you. Now, Reverend Plumley.
Thank you. One of the pieces that you mentioned in your statement at the beginning of the program, Mr. Moderator, was that there is some speculation that some of this change is arising out of the need for more depth that is related to and a result of the pain that churches have felt because of all sorts of scandals. Number one, I congratulate any church that is courageous enough to stand up and to admit that churches do things wrong, and sometimes in very large ways, and that we find our healing in things that we do together, in getting away from the idea that my needs come first and I must be entertained, I must leave here with something that I didn't have before. And rather approaching the whole service as something to which I contribute, in which I participate, rather than just...
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Robeck.
Yes, worship services are really about God. And, we're called to face God and listen to God and allow God to speak and to respond in response to the presence of God. And as I said earlier, I think I'm really for, in a sense, recapturing some of what we've lost at the time of the Protestant Reformation. And one of the things that I have found very helpful is to recover the liturgical year, where the pastor no longer preaches his or her hobby horse, but is forced to read through the Scriptures during the year and interact with all aspects of the Scripture. People come at different stages of development. Some are older, they want this peace and quiet, and others are younger and jumping around. The problem is the church is the people of God, and it's all ages. It's not simply one or the other, and we need to find ways better to integrate all age groups within the understanding of the church.
All right, thank you, Dr. Luxon.
Yeah, I think we just have to remember that worship style is a tool. It's not an end in itself. Yes. And to me, that the important thing is intentionality of worship leaders and churches to think about what they are doing, why they are doing it, and how that is going to bring people closer to God.
All right, thank you very much. And then Rabbi Levin.
A healthy tree has always the need to grow new boughs and new branches. But new boughs and branches can't exist without that trunk. And so there's always, I think, a strong interplay between the need to grow new ideas and new modes in worship and also to remain true to tradition. There was a time, Jewish worship is composed of psalms and what are called piyutim, or liturgical poems. And even though those poems and those pieces from the Bible are ancient, there was a time when they were new and modern. There was a time when they were new innovations. And so I think if we can weave new innovations authentically into tradition, we'll find that our worship is really innovative and meaningful.
All right, thank you very much. And to everyone, thank you for joining us for today's discussion, especially you for tuning in today. This has been, I hope, a very insightful and informative program, and hopefully you'll come and join us again next time when we gather around this table and discuss things we hope are interesting to you. And by the way, if you'd like to suggest a subject or a topic, you know how to reach us. So thank you very much. Today's program, not a lot of controversy, more observation. Some of the comments didn't have to do with any controversy or anything that was of disagreement, but it certainly is educational to hear from the various faiths and the backgrounds in the churches. So thank you so much for that today. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.